Good evening, everyone. This is Asmita, Center Head Jamshedpur Management Association, and I welcome you on behalf of JMA to the BAKE session on ABC of Leadership. I would like to introduce our speaker of today, Professor Sunil Kumar Sarangi. He is currently teaching Communication and Leadership at XLRI Jamshedpur. For 5 years now, he has been the Program Director of Basic Leadership Skills, the flagship management development program of XLRI. He has over 20 years of corporate and academic experience. He holds a Master of Arts degree in English Language and Literature as a University Gold Medalist. His area of research is language, entrepreneurship, and neurocommunication. He has worked for Goldman Sachs, Oracle, Dale Carnegie, India, where he got his international certification as a teacher and taught for a number of enterprises. He has designed and delivered management development programs and as resource faculty for senior IFS officer, allied officers of Government India, Central Labour Commissioners, etc. The executives of senior management of Canara Bank, State Bank of India, Indian Oil, Indian Overseas Bank, Tata Metallics, National Healthcare Nepal, executives from across levels of Society General Global Solution, Bank of Baroda, Genpact, Ashok Leyland, BioQuest Global, Himalaya Drug Co, and the list continues. Last year, he has also delivered a session on patient-doctor communication framework to an audience of neurologists, neuropsychiatrists, and PG students of medical science. With this, I would like to welcome Professor Sarangi and now hand it over the session to him. Thank you, sir.
With this, I welcome you to this terrific conversation that I look forward to having with all of you, called ABC of Leadership. I would go ahead and start what I think I must share with you. I'm so delighted to be sharing with you. But in between, I must also request you to pepper with your questions, to come back, intervene, interrupt, and ask questions so that we'll have a conversation rather than me telling you what are the leadership definitions and frameworks and models that you need to be using in your life. With this, let's get started. I would share, as probably I need to, with all of you, few of the slides that I think will make sense to our conversation. Yes. Friends, I'm sure all of you in your individual capacity as a leader, as a manager, as an executive, are extremely familiar with this concept. So I'm not staying here. I'm just kind of reminding you. So when we talk about leadership, these are few things that are bound to pop into our minds, and they are essentially the power we draw because of the title, position, ability to coerce people, to punish people, to hold them accountable, and most importantly, to exercise their power. At the same time, also we have not so authoritarian elements like connection power, which is born out of our ability to network or create network, be part of a network. The information, the quantum of information that all of us are endowed with, and we keep building that information repository. That's extremely important. Also, that gives a certain power, which is also having a bearing on our leadership ability. And this is what I believe all of you are familiar with. This is the least non-negotiable element that when you start stepping into the shoe of a leader, you start having it. That's the non-negotiable threshold element called knowledge. All of you, when you joined different organizations or you started driving your own enterprises, you, I'm sure, had certain amount of knowledge, certain amount of base and quantum of understanding of how the world functions, right? Through different associations, degrees, institutions that you've gone to be trained. So that's called the expert power. That's called the knowledge power. Now, beyond knowledge power, beyond expert power, beyond the power that you, all of you, draw on network and the power that you draw on your position, there is an absolutely wonderful finding, probably a decade ago, or more than a decade ago. And that's where all the neuroscientists, because that's an area that I'll be constantly delving into to make sense of my conversation and also my thoughts on leadership. And this statement is a no-brainer statement. All of us knew all along the line, but just that we kind of did not have the courage, the conviction to start believing in and start working on. And this is what neuroscience says. Neuroscience says leadership, when you want to impact others, the basic idea is you are impacting their brains. You talk to their brains. You are negotiating with brains of others. And what is the fundamental element that you start negotiating with the brains of others is derived from this called minimizing threat and maximizing reward. What it means, friends, is starting from the evolution 60,000 years ago, when probably our ancestors were walking this planet, we didn't have kind of brain. We were either responding to a stimulus that would give us threat or that would be absent by threat. So we would always respond as humans only when there was a threat, because we needed a stimulus called threat. Guess what? When there was threat, we would automatically have our limbic system or even the basal ganglia would immediately respond, saying there's a threat and you need to survive, so you need to respond. And thereby you would be motivated to or triggered into action. And what action? Either you would flee, or you would freeze, or you would fight. After 60,000 years, fast forward, we are extremely evolved. We aren't working from our basal ganglia. We aren't working from our limbic system or reptilian brain. We are working from that evolved part of our brain, which we call the prefrontal neocortex, which is, for our understanding, I'll keep referring to it as executive brain, the brain that you and I are now employing, the brain that helps us to be intuitive thinkers, to be creative thinkers, to be rational thinkers, to take decision, conscious decision. That brain is called prefrontal neocortex. And why am I talking about all these abracadabra of brain science? This executive brain is the brain that we constantly need to look for when we are at our best, when we want to lead, we want to give our best, we want to be motivated, we want to motivate others. So this is the brain that we need to operate from, called prefrontal neocortex or executive brain. And my conversation also would harp on how to ensure that we maximize the utility of this brain called prefrontal neocortex or executive brain. Let's get started, friends. When I say minimizing threat and maximizing reward, you would say no brainer, big deal. We all knew it. If we knew it, why have we not been doing it in our daily life, in our professional life, in our career, in our personal also existence? It's tough. It requires understanding. It requires practice. And guess what? Again, the same brain doesn't want to do hard work. Much as we say we are thinking people, the brain always loves to take shortcut, right? The brain loves to stay away from hard work, hard thinking, because logical thinking is extremely tough. Logical thinking requires a lot of fuel in our brain. It requires a lot of glucose in our brain. And that's when we start taking shortcuts, right? This is very, very easy, but it must be practiced. It must be consciously practiced in order for you to not only understand the nuances of leadership, but an effective leader in your personal and professional capacity. And my conversation also would keep harping on minimizing threat and maximizing reward, because that's where the humans are found to be at their best. So friends, how do we do it? How do we minimize threat and maximize reward? It sounds probably very nice. It sounds pretty cool, but is it practicable? Is it doable? And science says it is far more doable than we ever thought. And the first element that you as a leader must look forward to doing with others intangibly. By doing what? Are you constantly touching one of the core elements called status? What I mean by status? A status is not essentially given in writing. A status is not position and designation. Of course, it is position and designation, but also status is either up or lowered of also your leadership criticism, your leadership interaction, leadership conversation, leadership negotiation, right? When you want to up somebody's status, you can do it in myriad of ways, and I'm sure you know it, right? So by doing that positive action towards enhancing somebody's status, you are neurobiologically, neuroanatomically, not only enhancing the status, but you are pushing that person to work from the executive brain to be his or her best. Second, certainty. What is certainty that I'm talking about, friends? Certainty is extremely important. All of us, when the pandemic struck, we became very, very uncertain. We couldn't see through. It was absolutely, we were all drowned in a kind of blanket of dark fog. We couldn't see what lies ahead. And that started kicking in anxiety, depression, isolation, and the myriad of other problems that we have been facing, the world has been facing. It is down to one of the most important brain elements, the brain, your brain, my brain, everybody else's brain in this planet constantly looks for certainty, clarity. How? Because without certainty or clarity, the prefrontal neocortex, or rather the orbitofrontal cortex or OFC, can't make sense of things, of the unknown. For it to make sense of the unknown or things around, it constantly looks for certainty. So what it means is people who work with you, work for you, work under you, or you work with people or work under people, you constantly look for in your brain a certain amount of certainty as to what would happen tomorrow. How am I contributing to this organization? Is it certain that my contribution to this organization, to this work, is with certainty tied with the finest goal, the greatest goal of my department, of my organization, of my culture, of my society, of my family? So constantly the brain scans for an element of certainty. In the absence of certainty, the brain again retracts back beyond the prefrontal neocortex. And thereby, again, you start feeling absolutely unclear because your brain and you, we don't operate from prefrontal neocortex, and brain looks for certain amount of certainty all the times. And you as a leader, you are obligated. It is your responsibility. If you really think you are a great leader and you need to be a great leader, which all of us need to, we constantly need to act, clarify, interact, negotiate, persuade, and communicate with certain amount of certainty all the time. Very, very important, friends. Third element is autonomy. What is autonomy? What's the big deal about autonomy? Autonomy is a sense of freedom, again down to the brain. Our brains do operate at their best when they feel a sense of autonomy, because sense of autonomy is also tied with one of the most critical elements of our existence called the locus of control. Why do we feel isolated, incarcerated in this pandemic? Because our sense of autonomy is in a way threatened, blocked, restricted. So thereby our brain understands, maps, scans, and also interprets that autonomy has been restricted, autonomy has been reduced, and the brain starts feeling threatened. When it feels threatened, again, the prefrontal neocortex is the first part, the evolved part of our brain, the most important part of our brain, intuitive brain, the rational brain, the thinking brain, the logical brain starts taking a back seat, because the locus of control also starts reducing in its quantum. So autonomy is extremely important. Sense of autonomy, however flawed it is, friends. I repeat, a sense of autonomy is something that every leader worth his or her salt need to constantly inject into others. That's extremely important. If you really want to lead people and have them give you the best, give the organization best, then your leadership style must have this dose of extending autonomy. Very, very important, friends. Relatedness, what it means is how far you are going ahead and making people part of something, part of the organization, part of the department, part of the function, part of the work, part of the project. And that sense of relatedness is extremely fundamental to human emotion. Why? Relatedness also, which has a tremendous role in getting people to collaborate. As great leaders, sometimes or most of the times, you have to get people to collaborate. You have to get people to give their best. So you constantly need to feed this all important chemical called relatedness to people around all the time. Why? Because when we feel related, when this relatedness is emphasized, pronounced of something, of a larger group, of a department, of an organization, our level of motivation goes up because the nucleus accumbens, which feeds again, or rather it's get fed by ventral tegmental area, also gets that neurochemical. The release of dopamine becomes more, and relatedness is one element which essentially drives motivation and drives people to be more motivated. So make people feel related to something, because that sense of being related to something would always enhance their ability to perform a task, including our own self. So it's extremely important. The element in this series is called fairness. What is this fairness? And I'm sure you know it's no brainer again. A fairness is something that not only are we going to be fair in our own brain, in our own heart, it must be also reflected in our behavior and in our transactions and negotiations with others. Why? Again, going back to certainty, there's an element called predictability. Fairness gives a sense of predictability to others, and this predictability is extremely important for the brain to function at its best, and fairness extends consistency and predictability. So ensure that most of your actions, if not all your actions, which is probably fundamentally extremely difficult, but most of your actions, you should be known by an element of fairness, which is extremely important, friends, because fairness again leads to a reward system in the brains of others. It drives a reward mechanism, which is extremely important for your leadership ability, for your leadership drive, and for your leadership competence. And this is what I have been talking about for the last 10-15 minutes, friends. When I say SCARF, it means starting with status. C stands for certainty, A for autonomy, R for relatedness, and F for fairness. And this term called SCARF, it's a model for collaborating, influencing, motivating, and getting people to give their best. So you can spend probably a minute on this slide and make sense of what I have been kind of rattling off for the last 15 minutes time. So before I go to the next model, next element in our conversation, I would request any one of you, if you have any question, I would love to come back and give my answer. Am I clear, friends, so far? Is it making sense? Yes, friends. Any question on SCARF? Not yet.
I think Mr. Tajender Singh has raised his hands.
Oh, I'm so sorry, ma'am, because I'm not able to see anything beyond this slide. So you need to please help me. Yes, yes, Mr. Singh, please go ahead, sir. Please. Yes.
Mr. Tajender, do you have a question for sir?
Or is he moved?
Is there a question for me? Friends, is there a question, or we are good to go to the next leg of our journey, conversation? Yes, go ahead, please. I would be extremely happy to answer your question so that it becomes a proper conversation rather than a monologue.
Good morning, sir. Hare Ram this side.
Yes, please. Good morning. Go ahead, please.
Sir, how did relatedness actually help to develop the leadership quality, or how it is directly related with the leadership? I mean the requirements.
Oh, I'm sorry. Are you asking how is it related to leadership quality?
Yeah, yes.
Okay. See, as I told you, the finest, the bedrock definition of a leadership. What is a leadership? Yes. Is anybody asking anything, or can I go ahead and answer? Okay. Okay. Friends, as I have believed in, I have studied, I have done my research, and I've always believed that one of the key definitions of leadership is what we do to others, apart from, of course, leading our own self, our own soul, which of course has not been part of deliberately, consciously my conversation with you, essentially because most of you are working with people all around. So your technical expertise, what you do as a doctor, as an engineer, as a finance expert, apart from your technical expertise, which is non-negotiable, which is threshold, that is necessary, but that is not a sufficient condition. So I'm here to talk about and rather share with you the elements, frameworks, principles that would help you take care of that gap from having only necessary condition to sufficient condition. And these elements are the elements which feed into those sufficient conditions. And what are those sufficient conditions? How are we going to get people to be their best? How are we going to get people to be motivated? How we get people to give their best in their performance, right? So when we work in a team, what do I do? Even if I don't have kind of leadership authority, can I do something with my colleagues, with my peers, that we come together, we do our best? So that's where a model like enhancing status in my behavior, as they say, as in the concept of emotional intelligence, which probably also I would touch upon during my conversation, friends. I don't have any control over others, but what I have tremendous control over is my own action, my thought, and my emotion. And how do I regulate these three elements: my thought, my emotion, and of course my action scientifically, right? So these are the elements which in a way feeds into what I do with myself in order to elicit and ensure the best happens all around. And thereby, these are fundamental elements that define our ability to lead not only our own self, but also people around. Even if I'm not a kind of designated leader, when I do it, I become a leader. Because as I started my conversation and I went back to this, my most loved definition of leadership, friends, what did I say? I said, if my actions motivate or inspire others to do more, to learn more, to become more, and of course what, to dream more, then I'm a leader. So these actions are feeding into that very definitions. These principles are feeding into that very definition. Am I clear to you? Am I clear to you?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. This line has actually given some,
Yes,
I mean, the great side. Yeah.
Okay.
So actions, if someone is motivated with my action or someone is getting higher aspiration, that is really, I mean, the great. Yeah. Thank you, sir.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you. Thanks a lot. Thanks for asking the question. Yes, friends.
Sir, Devanjan this side.
Yes, please go ahead, please.
May I?
Louder,
yeah, Devanjan
please.
this side. Very good morning, sir. Am I audible,
yes.
sir?
You got to speak a little louder. Sorry, what's your name? Did you say? I'm sorry.
Yeah, Devanjan Ghosh, sir.
Yes, Devanjan Ghosh. Please go ahead.
Yeah.
If I'm not mistaken, we've met before, right? Yes, wonderful.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. So my question is that there are different types of leadership, like democratic leadership, autocratic. So will you touch upon different types of leadership and what?
Lovely. Thank you, Devanjan. Sorry, I remember your wonderful questions when I was your privileged teacher in the classroom. I believe we couldn't talk about it, but today.
Enjoyed your class, sir. Yeah.
Yes. Thank you. Thanks. I don't see you
one
there. Yes, please.
Yeah, and another one is that if you can touch upon the difference between manager and leader.
Sorry, say it again. Sorry, say it again. I couldn't quite get you.
The difference, yeah, the difference between manager and leader.
Oh, of course. Yes. Thank you, Devanjan. Thanks a lot. You know what? My idea of the conversation of leadership today is not at all having any kind of correlation with your managerial abilities, because I'm pretty confident that all these individuals, all the friends that I'm talking to today, I'm sure are already certified. They don't need any kind of ratification for their managerial abilities, right? All of you are managers. As I said, that when you come to a particular classroom, you go for a particular higher studies, right? So what you do is you produce your certificate of having done a particular course, right? And that having done particular course shows that you've gone through that tremendous effort of acquiring intelligence on that course. So what it means is the very fact that whatever you are doing, wherever you are doing, shows that you are efficient managers. So my conversation would not talk about your managerial competence, which I believe in my humble mind that you already have. My idea is to talk about that extra delta, whereby you stop being only a manager, but also become a leader, because leader is a superset of a manager and manager is a subset of a leader. Devanjan, am I clear? And my conversation.
Yeah, thanks. Yes,
Yeah.
yeah.
Great. Thank you, Devanjan.
Thanks for the clarification. Yeah. And this one, different types of leadership that you will touch upon, I believe.
Okay. Thank you. I'm really happy
Hope
that
I'm not taking everyone's time.
No, Devanjan, that's wonderful. After many years, when we are having this conversation beyond the classroom, I'm extremely happy. But yes, I'll also be speaking to other friends who I'm not able to meet. But definitely, if I'm not able to really answer some of your questions, please don't take it as my unwillingness, but my willingness to talk to you separately offline. And I would definitely have that conversation.
Right, sir. Okay.
Great. Thank you.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Yes, friends. So I'm kind of going ahead and redefining why these elements are important with the scientific reason. And now the idea of a leadership action. What is an idea of a leadership action? Is to influence, right, friends? You constantly influence. As a teacher in the classroom, my idea is to influence my students to learn more. My idea is to influence my students to work hard, right? Acquire knowledge as far as possible. My idea is to influence them to see things that they ideally would not like to see, right or wrong. But this idea of influence for leadership is extremely important. It's an imperative, right? So when I say influence, there are only 4 or 5 questions that research of leadership says that we must ask ourselves. I must ask myself before I go ahead and either influence the group of people that I want to influence or some individual that I want to influence. And this influence has nothing to do with your managerial authority. This influence has nothing to do with your ability to wield power, right? So look at this, friends. Before I influence, do I know these people? Or how well I know these people? And these are fundamental questions, friends. Believe me, please bear in mind, if you somehow, these 4 or 5 questions that I'm going to flash across the screen, if you somehow remember for a long, long time, I can guarantee you that your ability to influence as a leader would always be manyfold up. I repeat, understanding these 4 or 5 questions that I'm going to flash before you are extremely critical, friends, in your leadership influence. How far I'm committed to these people that I want to influence, right? That's extremely important. And how far are they committed to me, or would they be likely to be committed to me? And most importantly, if I want to influence, wield influence, am I a good example of a model that they would like to be influenced by? Extremely important, friends. This is all about self. The last one is all about self. And the one above, the 4 questions are about others. So that's where it's highly important that I constantly need to ask myself that if I would not to will my authority, how do I influence people? Can I influence people without authority? And that's, I believe, is one of the fundamental dimensions of leadership, friends. These are the 5 questions. Because, friends, influence doesn't happen in thin air. It's down to, as Bradford Cohen, the 2 individuals who wrote the finest research paper on influence, leadership influence, they talked about this law of reciprocity. And this is again down to brain, friends. Reciprocity is extremely important. It is just not an economic term of quid pro quo. When there is a quid pro quo, there is an exchange happens it also impacts the brain. The brain feels obligated. The brain feels indebted. And the same brain always would look forward to getting an opportunity to pay back. So that's extremely important, friends. So reciprocal exchanges are extremely important, and these are not the tangible ones. These are essentially the intangible, in the realm of intangibility, right? The same thing that I talked about in SCARF, right? When you enhance somebody's status, you are giving something, you are giving a currency, right, of status. That's extremely important. And this is where Cohen Bradford, David Cohen and Alan Bradford, they talk about these exchanges and how they feed into your ability to influence people, friends. These exchanges are extremely important. Without these exchanges, you can only end up with your ability to influence people with the positional power, with the power that has been invested in your position. Otherwise, you can't. Inspiration related currencies. What it means, friends, is how are you going to, the same thing, how am I going to make my students better than what they are beyond the classroom? Am I giving that currency to them? Am I exchanging that inspiration related currency to them? If the answer is yes, then probably I'm answering one of the fundamental questions of leadership influence positively, affirmatively. Task related currencies, friends, as a leader, again, you should look forward to getting an opportunity to give tasks to people, to your peers, to your juniors. It's not about the mundane task of the office work, the tasks that essentially would give them an extra benefit, extra edge of skill, of competence, which would help them enhance their competence and skill. That's called the task related currency that you are giving beyond your work. So by doing that, you are constantly exercising your ability to influence as a leader. Again, friends, this position doesn't have to be essentially the designation, the position of in an organization which are designed, which are fixed by definition, by employment. These positions are different. When you position like a mentor, like a good friend, like a guide. So these are the emotional positions. When you give, you wield influence. Of course, relationship is extremely important. And down to self-esteem, friends, as we've been talking about in Maslow's need hierarchy theory, self-esteem, the fourth layer, which is extremely important. So with these currencies, don't forget, friends, it goes back into the fundamental constitution of leadership called, when you are dealing with people, the only thing that you use is language, words. So when you are negotiating, directing, communicating, persuading, resolving a conflict, or negotiating, what you want from the others, mostly research finds to be hazy, to be unclear. So you constantly need to make sure that what you want must be broken down into digestible chunks of modules of clarity. When you give a task, you assign people in your project, you expect them to perform. Please ensure your directions, instructions, your conversation, your language must be broken down to digestible chunks, because this small, silly clarity is something the brain loves. So otherwise, your needs are just going to be a cluster of unclear, complex language, and thereby your ability to influence people's minds positively would drastically go down. Friends, again, purpose is extremely important in leadership journey. There's a lot of science, and I know my idea of talking about science is just to ensure that you understand that these are not pop culture, these are not pop psychology, but hard science, neuroscience, cutting edge 21st century science. Purpose is something extremely important that you as a leader, me as a leader, we need to constantly feed into the people that we work with or people who work with. What is this purpose, friends? Each and every action that they do, or most of the actions that get into, do those actions finally feed into the purpose. What is that big purpose? The purpose may be organizational or personal, anything, but there must be an alignment, right? That is one of the most important reasons why in the modern times, friends, management by objective, MBO, as you know, Peter Drucker, which probably traditional mighty firms like Tata Steel and a lot of other organizations across the globe have always believed in, and it got refined by Andy Groves of Intel. And what he did is he added something called OKR, objective and key results. What is objective and key result? What do I need to do? What is my objective? And each and every action that I'm performing, having to perform, is it aligned? Is it feeding into that objective? If the answer is yes, the brains would always be having a sustained level of motivation. And you as a leader, you are obligated to ensure that this purpose is always in alignment with that OKR or OGSM. All these elements must be part of the action that you get people to perform. Very, very important, friends. Yes, friends, this is again, I thought I must have this intercession with this statement from one of the finest scientists that I have been following, Professor Neil deGrasse Tyson, one of the greatest astrophysicists alive today. That's what he says. In science, it's absolutely linear. In human behavior or social science, it is non-linear. That's the reason why physics happens to be so easy and sociology, hard sociology, is so very hard. And this is down to the human sociology, friends. Again, friends, by doing all that, what essentially you are doing to others and to yourself is you are giving a clarity, a sense of clarity to your own existence. So perception of yourself, how you interact with people, it gets refined, gets built. And when it gets built, the parietal lobe, which is part of, again, prefrontal neocortex, it changes. When it changes, you perceive reality. And this has a tremendous positive impact on your thalamus. And thalamus, in fact, has a tremendous role inside your brain to make you effective, to make you competent, and make you absolutely a leader. The third element is trust. I would, of course, within the stipulated time, I would touch upon what my dear friend, Devanjan Ghosh talked about, the different styles. I would, of course, talk about styles. But before that, I think this is the last element in my conversation that I would like to talk about, friends. Trust is extremely important, friends. And as I have understood, I have found out through my interactions, through my teaching, my learning, it takes a lot of time. It's a long time procedure, and it doesn't get born overnight. But you constantly need to be making every possible effort to ensure that this element is a fundamental pillar which drives your effectiveness as a leader. Trust is extremely important, friends. I would not stay here. And how do you, friends, how do you really, these are few things, just by doing small digestible chunks that you get into doing, they in a way build trust. No, as far as possible. I know it is extremely difficult, friends, but as far as you don't get into not only gossiping, but as a leader, how far can you really, gossip is not bad per se, as science says, but the toxic gossips must be curtailed, must be eliminated in our professional settings, and you need to discourage. To a large extent, friends, people who do a lot of micromanagement, because they tend to threaten the creativity, they need to threaten the autonomy. Thereby, micromanagement is essentially is an element which acts as a counter to trust. And setting realistic goals is extremely important, friends. As far as possible, a culture of fear must be eliminated. And a sense of respect, no brainer again, friends. I'm repeating from the theory and science of leadership, is extremely important, imperative. Again, making people feel that they're part of something big, the larger picture, right? Every single action they perform, how it feeds into the largest vision and mission of the company, the organization, the group, the team, the function, the department, is extremely important, friends, constantly. And thereby you enhance not only your leadership ability, but you enhance the quantum of the trust that you project with others. Extremely important, friends. So as they say, friends, Our brains are hardwired to trust, and I would now discuss one of the 8 methods that you can enhance in your professional setting trust by doing it iteratively, not one time but many times over, and that would help generate trust according to the great uh, behavioral neuroscientist called Paul Zak in one of the finest research papers that he wrote, The Neuroscience of Trust. Um, Again, the ventral striatum region, prefrontal cortex, I'll skip for the moment, friends. Why? Because this all important tiny neurotransmitter called oxytocin is extremely important. So your actions, most of the times, how far they help secrete oxytocin in the brains of others also is a parameter or a barometer of your ability to generate trust. Guess what? Recognize excellence. First of the 8 methods. I would go a little faster here. Friends, how do you recognize excellence? By making it an institutional pattern. When somebody does something better than what the call of duty demands, that it is imperative that as a leader that recognize that excellence, make it pronounced. So very, very important. And that has to be a public recognition. I'm sure all of you already know it. I'm telling you the science part of this public recognition, which enhances your trust, the trust that you share as a leader with others. Inducing challenge stress. What is that, friends? Inducing challenge stress. So apart from the regular work, you as a leader, do you feed this basic urge of humans that challenge stress? What is a challenge stress? A challenge stress is essentially a stress that gets induced in our brains when I know I have a challenge before me, but I have to perform. And this challenge stress releases that stress hormone. And that stress hormone should be just right enough for the challenge to stay motivating. If the challenge stress is much more than somebody's skill, again, friends, there's a breakdown. You would be leaving, you wouldn't be doing great in your leadership style if your ability to curtail the challenge stress to that level whereby it rightly fits into somebody's skill and competence. But challenge stress, constantly extending challenge stress is very, very important, friends. This adrenocorticotropin is extremely important, friends. Very, very important. And it literally is the one important neurotransmitter which is tied with this challenge stress. Give people discretion, friends, to a large extent. Are you allowing people to have a discretion as to how they work within the mandate that you have? Then also, this is another way that you enhance trust as a leader. Enabling job crafting, friends, to an extent, let people craft their job. Let people craft the contours of their job. Your basic job requirements, outcomes, you've spelled out, but to an extent, allow some kind of freedom. Enable them to do their crafting. By doing that, that enhances the level of trust again as a leader, friends, which is extremely important, non-negotiable parameter. Sharing information broadly, friends, this is one of the areas that research has been pointing out during pandemic. Those are the leaders who have been found to be sharing information, however, whatever the information may be, relevant, irrelevant, but the more information a leader starts sharing, the more her leadership trust becomes. So genuinely start sharing information broadly, friends. So, and take initiative to share information as far as possible, because that feeds into that human urge to trust people, friends. Very important, very, very important, friends. I've been talking about friends, so I don't think I need to say anything here because it's something that we also covered in our SCARF model. This is a very important area, friends. Are you only making people better managers, or you are making them better leaders? Are you making people only good at what they're doing, or you're making them better masters? If you go back to those of you who are familiar with Maslow's need hierarchy theory, friends, the top layer, the 5th layer, the self-actualization is extremely important, friends. Am I a leader who looks for an opportunity to extend to my peers so that they perform something and become more skilled, become more bigger masters, and they tend towards this self-actualization. They tend towards understanding the full potential. So if you're constantly ensuring these elements to be there in the work, in your transaction, in your communication, in your interaction, in your conversation, in your instructions, then you are taking care of this whole person growth, which is extremely important, friends. Again, trust goes up. So that's where you become from a leader, a guide, a coach, a mentor. And last but definitely not least, friends, those of you who traditionally been told, so please consign it to the dustbin of oblivion. Showing vulnerability is an extremely important part of the research in leadership. Vulnerability has been gaining grounds, and what it constantly is pointing out to is showing vulnerability as a leader. Unless you are in high stake life and death situation, is very, very important for generating trust, friends. Vulnerability is extremely important. Sharing vulnerability is not bad according to the modern research and practice of leadership, because that really, really makes you more trustworthy, makes you more human, makes you more connected. It's a sign of a secure leader, not an insecure leader. Nobody would tell you, nobody would cast any doubt on your competence, on your knowledge when you ask for help. So 21st century research says it's absolutely fine, great to go ahead and ask for help, because that's a sign of you being secure. And friends,
Sir, sorry to interrupt you, sir.
yes, please go ahead. I would love to. Thanks a lot. Yes, please go ahead and ask.
Yeah, can you please repeat the concept which we rightly said, that vulnerability, showing vulnerability is a great sign of leadership?
Okay.
With some example.
Okay. When you say vulnerability, when do you think leadership starts becoming vulnerable? Am I clear in my so that I can answer your question? This is I'm glad that you're asking this question. I'm saying your idea of leadership, when do you think your leadership kind of goes down, moves down with a tinge of vulnerability? When do you think leadership becomes vulnerable?
When the trust level is low.
Sorry? Go ahead, please.
If the trust level is low.
Absolutely, that is an outcome. I'm talking about action. See, what I'm talking about here is a set of actions that we need to constantly perform, make it a habit, so that our effectiveness as a leader is manifold over more. So out of that, one element I talked about trust. In trust, again, there are 8 methods according to science. And the 8th method is showing vulnerability, which is kind of counterintuitive, right? All these days, these months, these years, probably people have been telling us, you know what, as a leader, you not only need to be strong, but your weakness should not be shown, right? That's what constantly has been fed to all of us. So science is saying that's, after all, a great leader. Vulnerability was Dwight D. Eisenhower, the Supreme Commander of Allied Forces during Second World War. And there were times when he would absolutely go ahead and share his concern, his anxiety with his immediate generals, commanders. And guess what? The commanders would go all out to ensure that they would not only give the best for the next 24 hours, but they would ensure that their commander, Supreme Commander Dwight D. Eisenhower, who later on becomes the President of the United States, would not really get that opportunity to show his vulnerability. But he constantly would look for an opportunity to show vulnerability in that control room all the time. And that is one of the biggest signs of leadership. So when I'm saying, let's say I'm doing some work in response to your question, I'm doing some work. I as a teacher, let's say as a teacher, I'm having a class conversation, a high stake conversation. And suddenly I'm asked a question which is beyond my comprehension. So I, as a teacher, if I believe my being a teacher, my being a leader is important and trust is important, what's wrong in saying, you know, friends, my area of understanding in this my area of understanding in this particular topic is probably minimal. So I really don't know. My knowledge doesn't really extend to this area. When I say this, and I honestly, genuinely say this, what am I doing? I'm not. The world might be thinking I'm showing vulnerability, but that's fine. We are supposed to be, humans are supposed to be vulnerable. We aren't supposed to be invulnerable. When we pretend that we are not vulnerable, thereby we don't do things effectively. So the science of vulnerability says the following. You not only should you feel vulnerable, but it's fine for you to also share that vulnerability with the people who you are leading. Is absolutely fine. Am I clear? Am I clear?
Yes, you are clear.
Okay, thank you. So friends, so the question that you need to ask, what do I do? What do I do in my individual professional capacity? How do I really enhance this neuroscience of trust? If you start asking this question and start answering this question, I think there's a lot that you shall be achieving in the days to come. Yes, please. Yeah. Is there a question for me? Is there a question? Sorry.
Professor. Yeah.
Yes, go ahead, please.
Am I audible? So, yeah.
Yes,
so
please.
before you
Please.
go ahead, yeah. So before you go ahead, I think the subject would change. So I thought I'll just ask my question.
Yes,
Otherwise,
please.
the context would be lost.
No problem.
You talked about recognition, public recognition. This is a subject which has been debated a lot. You know, for some public recognition may be important, but for some, just giving them more responsibility is the motivation enough. Or a one-to-one conversation with some people, or a very personal pat on the back works for some other kind of employees, if I can use that word. So there is another theory which says that it is very important to understand the psyche of the team with which you are working with, which is their personal likes, dislikes, what is their moral fabric, and your system of recognition should be aligned to the receptors of your team that you are leading. Does that hold good, and how does your thoughts on
Okay,
those?
thank you. Thank you. May I know who I'm speaking with? I'm sorry, I can't see any one of you. So that's lowering my motivation to interact with you, though I'm kind of keeping my level of motivation very high. Who am I speaking with?
So
Okay.
This is Aman Choda
Okay.
from this.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Yes, you know what? Let me tell you the first thing, and I hope you'll not take it as my offensive statement. But believe me, it is born out of my tremendous understanding, if I can call the quantum of understanding. The debate is, it's settled. It is no longer there. It's not raging. The jury is not out. The jury is already in. The verdict is out. So I talked about thalamus, and probably 5-6 years ago, a series of neuroscientific research told us that some people, the public recognition, why it is important, because when you recognize me in isolation, in person, I feel, of course, it enhances my oxytocin level of trust goes up. I feel motivated. My nucleus accumbens gets positively impacted. The level of motivation is high. At the same time, there's an amount of what should I say, incomprehensibility that my brain kind of latches onto, and that incomprehensibility is it true? Is it fine? Is the recognition 100% genuine? When it is done in public, my thalamus, my brain thalamus, which makes sense of the things, it gets a solid, it gives a solid instruction. It actually kind of makes sense of the reality as it is, and it picks up the signals of reality as complete, as whole. So public recognition is always couple of deltas up private recognition. So when you are, it doesn't matter whether your organization or my organization does it or doesn't do it. As far as science, and I say science, I'm saying incontrovertibly proven science, empirical science tells us that public recognition always goes longer in terms of ensuring the sustained motivation is there, rather than just private one-to-one recognition. So I would always exhort and urge and recommend that when it is a high-stake recognition, let it be a public recognition. At the same time, it should be just the opposite. When we are trying to fine tune people, when we're trying to hone people, their competence, we try to have people improve. The theory, again, the science goes, I'm sure all of you are doing it. I'm just kind of ratifying. It should be one-to-one. Because there you are asking people to be better, right? So that's the reason when in public you really tell people why they need to improve. The prefrontal neocortex shuts, amygdala takes over. That's called the amygdala hijacking, right? It senses threat, and thereby even if you are saying the most important, relevant, and scientifically best thing to that person would never be motivated to really act on your inputs. So that has to be one-to-one. But recognition has to be always, I repeat, public.
Thank you.
Thomas. Thanks for asking this question. Thank you. Yes. Any other question from anyone? Yes. Any question, friends? Okay. Friends, earlier my old friend Devanjan Ghosh asked me to talk about leadership styles. Much as I thought this is there, all of you are doing it, but nevertheless, since he talked about it, I think I'm morally obligated to talk about it. Friends, in the whole of things, there is one element that I did not deliberately put on my slide. It's called emotional intelligence, which I'm sure all of you must have heard to a sickening extent in your career, right? What is this emotional intelligence? The emotional intelligence is, again, the self-awareness, the self-regulation, empathy, motivation, and social skill, the 5 important components. But emotional intelligence is not only acquiring these 5 important components. How do we employ them? How do we apply them in our professional settings? And thereby, a group of researchers, along with Dan Goldman, Professor Richard Boetsis, and Annie Murky, the authors of this great, wonderful idea called resonant leadership. Resonant, RESONANT, resonant leadership. As a leader, that is one of the highest forms of leadership. Are you a resonant leader? And how do you become a resonant leader? You become a resonant leader by following, I'm sure you know the styles, but 4 important styles, or rather working in 4 important areas. That is called affiliative leadership style, coaching leadership style, visionary leadership style, and democratic leadership style. So what are these elements? Starting with the last first, a democratic leader is somebody who not only takes decisions, but takes decisions with all inputs from all the stakeholders, team members. Even if he knows that the decision that he's crafted may be the best decision, but when he makes it democratized, what he does is, this is where the science again comes back to play, friends. Much as we sometimes become very confident in our expertise, in our understanding, in solving a problem, taking decision, we need to constantly know that we human beings are so very prone to committing errors that we can never even imagine, right? It's almost like the famous René Descartes, the mathematician philosopher, when he famously said, I think, therefore I exist. He made a fundamental error. Our thinking is always has to be colored with our feeling, has to be colored with our emotion. It cannot not be possible unless we are robots, right? That's very, very important. So why I'm telling you is, much as you think you have taken the most rational, confident, hard, evidence-based decision, there are always possibilities that you may have taken some of these decisions which are peppered, which are suffused with your personal cognitive biases. What are these cognitive biases, friends? Cognitive biases are essentially the errors in our judgment, the fundamental ingrained errors in our judgment, right? So there are many cognitive biases. I think my conversation doesn't have the scope of explaining those things, but I request today, friends, it would really help you immensely. Go and read upon something called cognitive biases and how they interfere in our decision making and leadership ability. So when I know however robust my decision may be, if my decision, there's a possibility if my decision is robust, even then it can have the traces of my own personal cognitive biases, and thereby having it subject to the inputs from my peers, from my juniors, from my team members, always would go a long way in ensuring these cognitive biases that invisibly are present in my decision are kind of to a great extent taken care of. And guess what? That's not the scientific reason alone. Also, it makes people feel part of the larger group. It makes people feel motivated. It injects the same oxytocin that I talked about earlier in the day. So democratic leadership is not only nice, it's not that all important namby-pamby, touchy-feely leadership style, but this is one of the finest, one of the toughest, and one of the most, should I say, time-tested leadership styles, friends, because it is great for organization, it's great for the leader, and also it is tremendously great for people who follow you. So that's democratic. Affiliative, friends, again, ensuring constantly that you are affiliated. You aren't outside. You're not ostracized. You're not abandoned. You're not excommunicated. Because again, neuroscience says, friends, when you excommunicate and ostracize people, the pain it generates in our brain is equivalent to the pain that you and I would have when literally our bone would be crushed. And that's fundamentally scientifically proven. So exclusion, excommunication, ostracization go against the fundamentals of affiliative leadership. So affiliative leadership is extremely important. Again, visionary, friends, you should be constantly, you're not only should your vision of the organization be clear, but also the vision of their personal growth must be all the time attainable and intertwined with the vision. And that must be spelled out intermittently all the time. That's visionary. And of course, coaching. As all of you know, friends, coaching is you are not only a leader, you are not only a manager who's there to do transactional work, but how are you coaching people to make them better at what they are? Of course, you need to have a lot of knowledge for becoming a coaching leader, which is essentially one of the fundamental styles of resonant leadership. And this coaching constantly makes you more effective, more trustworthy, more competent. Because by coaching, you are not only generating knowledge base, you are not only upping the knowledge base in your peers and your followers, but also you are becoming better in your knowledge. These are the 4 styles and how they feed into you, your resonant leadership style. Again, friends, it's a extremely thick, impregnable area. You literally probably we may have a different conversation some of the time. Mindfulness, which is essentially an Oriental philosophy and which has become one of the important rages across the academia and research field in the area of leadership in the West. Mindfulness, which is essentially an Oriental philosophy and has and they have acknowledged the Oriental masters, the Indian masters, the Buddhist masters. So mindfulness is extremely important. Thereby, am I somebody who was given to also put a leash in the meandering and wandering of my brain? When I'm talking to you, I should be, as far as possible, ensuring my brain is in this conversation. Or am I thinking of the class that I have at 2 o'clock? Or am I thinking of how to actually ensure my class not only goes well, but ensure that 3 o'clock assignment that I have given to my students should also be talked about? If I'm letting my mind meander, then I'm not doing well as a resonant leader. So for me to be mindful to tell myself that, yes, this distracting thoughts are invading my mind and I need to curtail. And that's the first step towards mindfulness. Need to be hopeful, mindfulness, hope, and compassion. These are the 3 fundamental elements that must feed into your being for you to be a resonant leader. Only then you can be affiliative, visionary, coaching, and democratic. So hope is extremely important, friends. Corona has struck all of us. The pandemic has absolutely thrown the world out of its gear. But do we have the hope? I mean, yes, of course, we will survive. We've survived before and we'll survive and come back with a vengeance. And when I constantly tell myself, this is self-generating hope that I'm inducing in my being. And the last element is, of course, compassion. Compassion towards others, compassion towards my own self. So these 3 elements and the 4 styles would make you resonant leaders. And that's probably one of the finest forms of leadership in 21st century. And most importantly, during this time, when we are seeing the old rules of science and social science are getting challenged and the new rules are getting born, these are constants in leadership, understanding the journey of our own as well as of others. Thank you, friends. And I would be throwing this session for question and answer. And I look forward to your questions. I'm kind of done with my conversation.
Yeah, Professor Sarangi, very good afternoon. And
Good
this is Sanjay Behra from Tata Steel Mumbai office. A really very good session and eye-opening. Even though day-to-day life we are engaging in various leadership implementation as well as training, this is one of the best ever session I found in refreshing the knowledge. I have
Thank
got
you.
two questions, sir. Unfortunately, we are not able to meet virtually. We are meeting, but definitely I heard a lot about you from our TMDC and many of my colleagues who have been trained by you. So excellent session. So I have got two questions. What leadership quality one needs to develop? One is to manage the external stakeholder. Another similar questions, which quality a leader, good leader needs to develop to manage the Gen X or millennials? These are the two questions for me because every day to day things we find Gen X and millennials whoever joins very out of the college very difficult to manage because they think that they are already a leader. So here in Tata Steel, we even though democratic leadership we follow, but still it is a like military bureaucracy leadership you can see. So your advice to this, two questions, sir.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Thanks for your kind words. That's pretty inspiring. And you've raised my bar. I have to be better. Thank you. Just a few days ago, and you know what? I'm so happy for this question. I don't know whether I'm going to give you the answer that will satisfy you, but this is the only scientific answer that I have for myself found. Having this conversation with the CMD of one of the PSU banks a few days ago, I was having this conversation. He asked me this question, and I said, "There is the millennials are they're outliers." But you know what? These fundamental principles of leadership also apply to them. In a way, the only leadership style that I have seen working with them, and this is a constant question from the top level leadership from many PSUs, because PSUs are, and Tata Steel, of course, they're fundamentally very robust organizations. There's a strict hierarchy. The executive director, in fact, one of the executive directors of the PSU group of executive directors, they asked me that when we have these new GTs, they just come banging into a room and barge into a room and they don't take appointments, and that's fine. So what is the way we need to deal with them? See, frankly speaking, sir, I'll tell you what, you don't have to deal with any one of them. All I would tell you is, those of you who are well versed in a theory called situational leadership, Ken Blanchard, in fact, these millennials, you need to be constantly flexible enough in your mind that one leadership style will never work with these millennials, because they are different, and they have to be different. They have not been fed the same food that we've been fed, right? They have not been exposed to the things that we have been exposed to, or rather we are not exposed to. So imagine that the way they've been brought up, a constant attack, onslaught, a positive onslaught of media, mass media. So they see all these things, and constantly they draw strength from these different worlds of fantasy, be it Harry Potter or be it Disney World or be it the Avengers, right? So what happens for them is their role models are always shifting. So you can't be democratic all the time with them and expect them to really behave and give their best. But the theory of motivation in them stays the same as the theory of motivation in all of us. The same neurochemicals would do the same work that they would do in our brain. So constantly by changing leadership style. And I would tell you what, and to respond to this question, the last element I said, resonant leadership, has been by research found to be the best form of leadership as far as driving these millennials, because the millennials, you can't give them threat and get them to work.
Yeah,
they would not be motivated by your threat. You can't tell them that, you know what, you have a long career. If you do well here, you have a long career. They are not driven by a long career in your organization, right? They don't look for the kind of job security that probably our generation was looking for. So for them, they don't matter, right? So thereby, for them to be effectively motivated, you have to constantly change your style in situational leadership style, but shift between situational leadership and resonant leadership. That's what I've been telling all these PSU leaders, as much as I would be telling you, sir. And believe me, this is not theoretical. You please, we'll have another conversation. Situational leadership, shifting between situational leadership and resonant leadership. The best form of leadership, can I have the tenacity to stay resonant in my style? If the answer is yes, then probably that is the best. Or if I'm not able to really handle my own resonance, then I can shift to situational leadership, as Ken Blanchard famously said. Shift between situational leadership and resonant leadership. and that will tremendously work with this new age millennials, because they are also driven by the same method, scientific methods. Only thing that trigger is different. The trigger is different from yours and mine's. But these are the two styles that I would recommend to be used for these millennials.
And I thank you so much, sir. In fact, Glenn Blanchard is also my favorite author on leadership.
Great,
I also go a lot of books by them. Thank you so much. Really,
you're welcome, sir. Thanks for asking the question.
Yeah. Thank you.
Good morning, sir.
Yes, yeah. Madhukar. Yes, how are you doing,
sir?
Madhukar?
Good afternoon, and how are you? I'm fine. Very nice to see you again.
Yes.
Off campus, and it's actually a privilege to interact with you again and again. It's really a motivating and learning session. Great, sir. So, sir, we have touched upon multiple points, and actually, Mr. Vera also asked you a question. We discussed about minimizing threat and maximizing reward. We also discussed about emotional position in the mind of our colleague or maybe peers or superiors. And also we discussed about cognitive biases. So my question is that there is an environment where every individual has been brought up, which you were just talking about the millionaire session. How it's possible to change the mindset as a leader or as a manager, let's say, because I have been brought in one direction on in a one atmosphere, and now I am supposed to be a great leader. Does this really impact the cognitive biases, and it helps? Is it possible for an individual to improve leadership practicing going forward?
Okay, thank you, Madhukar. I mean, before I'm extremely pleasant, extremely delightful to have met you today after probably many years. Yes, getting back to the brass tacks of your question, the answer is an absolute emphatic yes. The more and more research in leadership says leadership is essentially a function of your iterative behavior. It's an F of your iterative behavior. Can I really motivate today? I neurochemically understand how brain functions. I do those right things today, and tomorrow I regress to what I earlier used to do and expect them to behave. No. For them to really have a concrete habit of being motivated by my behavior is extremely important. It has to have a kind of certain number of iterations, right? And nobody knows what is the number of iteration, because I would say till the time the brains of others, they find you this behavior as consistent, as going back to consistency. It's all about the fairness and consistency. If they see a pattern of consistency in you, then you follow from consistency doesn't matter, because they would still work from the prefrontal cortex. So for you to be motivated, it is not about motivating others. It is about how far I'm motivated to do what I intend to do. And can I go ahead and do it at least, I don't know, 20 times, regardless of what they do. If I can do it 20 times, then good enough to ensure that the brain understands and recognizes as a pattern of consistency. So it is absolutely down to behavior. And you know what, Madhukar, I must tell you, I'm glad that I'm having this conversation with you after many years. It is essentially, they say life, it's not, they call it epigenetic. There are experts like Dr. Bruce Lipton, the evolutionary biologist. They've done tremendous research. Sometimes it's easy for us to always blame the genes, right? The gene is like that. That's very unscientific. We are products of what we see, the patterns we see, the world view that we carry around in us. And it's largely a function of the environment that I have lived in, the people that have been able to shape my life, the teachers who have taught me, the friends that I've had, and the books that I have read, and the food that I have taken in my life. So all these things, when are there, it is always external. So it also indicates that, yes, it's an emphatic yes. My behavior and conscious behavior is extremely important in defining the destiny of my leadership effectiveness. It is not at all driven by some genetic destiny.
Right, sir. Thanks, sir. Thanks for.
I'm not sure, Madhukar. I mean, you're a kind soul. I'm not sure whether actually I satisfied your question or not. But believe me, we'll have this conversation. Please.
Sure, sir. I'll get in touch with you separately, sir. And thanks for your question. It's a great extent. It has been resolved. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Madhukar. God bless you.
See you soon. Thank you, sir.
Good morning, sir. This is Gaurav from JISCO.
Yes, sir.
It's always being very insightful attending your encouraging sessions, sir. My question was which leadership style or way helps in scaling up any socio-environmental initiative for the larger demography?
Great, sir. Thank you, sir. I don't know. I have always been swearing by. In fact, your own founding father, JRD Tata, he's one of the few business leaders who immediately pops into a humble mind of a teacher like me when I think of resonant leadership. Though resonant leadership was never talked about when he was alive, he was around. So it is not about only. It is imperative that I've mapped that resonant leadership with also state leaders who are managing state affairs, right? So those are the leaders to a great extent. It's very difficult to be a resonant leader. But when you talk about socio environment, enhancing the intensity of socio cultural environment, which is extremely important for any organization, because the organization cannot exist in isolation, right? It's a product of the socio cultural environment, and I'm glad that you're asking this question. So to impact that socio-cultural environment, I would not find anything close to what I call resonant leadership. And we can have this conversation on resonant leadership. And it's not only theory, the research that probably Richard Boyce and Anne McKee and of course Daniel Goleman, they had an iterative research they conducted, and they found out those were the people who had that resonant leadership more in them were found to be impacting the environment the most. So resonant leadership, there is nothing better or nothing which can come close to resonant leadership, which is extremely important. And what is that? The basic ingredient. It starts with the self, compassion, hope, most importantly, mindfulness. And of course, this is absolutely thick, impregnable. But mindfulness, I believe, is down to, even neuroscience is proving it right. People who are more mindful, people who are given either by practice, knowingly or unknowingly, whose mindfulness factor is more, their ability to go towards becoming resonant leader is extremely high. So I would bring it down to mindfulness, compassion, and hope. And thereby, of course, the 4 areas that earlier Debanjan Ghosh asked, and I responded. How far I'm using? Of course, you cannot not use. You have to use sometimes your authority. You have to. How can the police not use authority? How can the army not use authority? They have to. But in their day-to-day transaction, are they also affiliative, visionary, coaching, and democratic? Because these are the outward projections of compassion, hope, and mindfulness, which is the highest form of leadership to impact the larger space, to in fact impact the world we live in. So I would say it's resonant leadership. We can have a conversation. I would share some of the most important findings, principles, and frameworks. Probably this session is to that extent may not allow me to do that. But I would share my contact details with all of you. I'm doing it. So you can anytime. I'll be extremely happy to take your call and have a conversation. And I'm sending my phone number as well as my email ID. So stay in touch, sir.
Sarangi, I have one question.
Just a second, please. Hang on, please. So I'm not sure if I answered your question or not, Mr. Gaurav. I'm not sure.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. You answered my question. I got the points.
Thank you. Please take my number. I think this is. There are some tools and frameworks I need to tell you because I'm constantly looking at the clock. So please take my number. It's there. I'm sure you are looking at the chat box. So take my number.
Yes.
We'll have a conversation whenever you're free. Give me a call. Okay, sir. Yeah.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks
Yes, please. Over to you. Yes, sir.
Yeah. Professor Sarangi, this is Avinash from Tata BlueScope. How to remain upbeat on the resonant leadership in this new age of digital communication, when we are not having face-to-face communication with peers, colleagues, superiors. How? Because I'm sure in XLRI, the youngsters, you must be having in last PGP course and this PGP course also, because face-to-face conversation or the human-to-human conversation is or interaction is also plays important role in leadership development, gestures, body language, communication styles in digital thing in last 18 months. How to remain upbeat in this 4 visionary coaching, affiliative, and democratic
Thank
leadership?
you. Who am I speaking to, by the way? I'm so sorry.
This is Professor. This is Avinash Panchakshari from Tata BlueScope Steel.
Okay, okay.
And
Yes.
I would like to inform you that I attended basic leadership course last year, Feb 2020, just before the pandemic in
Avinash, oh,
Jamshedpur.
thank you.
Yeah.
Old friends coming back here again. Thank you, Avinash. Thanks a lot. I'm so glad that I'm speaking with you. As much as I'm glad that I'm speaking with the larger audience. Avinash, you know what? I'm so happy to be telling you. Probably I wouldn't have had this conviction probably if you had asked me at the beginning of the pandemic. But I'm having an absolute conviction that the rules, ground rules of leadership style, the ground rules of motivating, inspiring, all the neurochemicals, the neuroscience, it applies to a great extent to absolutely in entirety also on this virtual medium. Only thing that is very, very draining on virtual medium when you're doing it in virtual medium, and this is where I have spoken with a lot of experts and they have ratified my own understanding, that it saps, it takes a lot of your energy. What you are doing, let's say, to an extent that you, without any effort, you're doing in-person interactions, negotiations, conversations, meetings. When you're doing it online, please remember you have to do it delta more. You do everything that you're doing earlier, but only thing that you have to do differently is delta more. And this is what has been also proven by research. In fact, a few days ago, that became a kind of talk of the town when IBM CEO, the Indian that we all feel proud of, Arvind Krishnan, when he famously wrote back. In fact, that reflected that some said, you know what, this man also inching towards that resonant leadership style that I was having an intense conversation with Mr. Gaurav a while ago. So that reflected that, yes, on virtual medium, all these things remain, but you have to emphasize, you have to make it more pronounced for you to be more connected, for you to make more sense. So I would say your effort, the only thing that is expected of you as a leader is do it delta more, do it bit more, because these cues, as they say, as in scientific term, they call it the thin slices, right? Which Malcolm Gladwell talks about, the thin slices, referring to a wonderful research by Professor Nalini Ambadi. The thin slices, you need to upgrade the thin slices. And those of you who are not familiar with this term called thin slices, friends, please, you can read upon the concept called thin slicing. So you have to upgrade these thin slices by doing everything that you're doing, but doing it more. Clear, Avinash?
Yes. I'm convinced.
Thank you. Thank you.
Sir, I have a question. Though you have already responded, my name is Shyam Thakur.
Yes.
And you have already responded while you are talking to Mr. Madhukar Thakur. Sometimes we say that he's a born leader, and sometimes we say that whether these capabilities, which actually we receive from our sense organs and the behaviors of our mind, can be surpass if someone is not coming from that background. And if so, that and some of the basic tips by which we can go into that era and say that yes, and to showcase that yes, we have achieved success.
Thank you, Shyam. You know what? Thank you. Thanks a lot. This is again going back to the most fundamental question. I'm glad that you're still asking this question. I would, my understanding, you know what, as a humble teacher, that of course, again, my understanding may be to that extent limited, but which is very intense. I can tell you from my own reading, research, teaching, executive coaching, epigenetic, read this term called epigenetic. For a long time, the world started with the likes of Francis Galton, right, who believed that you're born with a particular intelligence and that remains constant, that remains fixed, right? Intelligence doesn't really grow. The modern age research is pointing to a direction which is opposite to that, which is above your genetics, which is above what you were born into. So how do you do that? By not only ensuring that you are constantly making an effort, but also the enablers that you have around you. Are you having sufficient enablers? So if the sufficient enablers are meeting that threshold condition, then what your gene is acting like, your gene is not your destiny. See, I mean, those of you who would also like to read a little more, then you can read that paper called gene not being your destiny. The gene is not really the destiny, much as we, for a long time, we humans, we believe the gene is destiny. So epigenetics tells us that yes, by constant and conscious effort, enablers all around. And there are, you know what, there are things also which are not in my control. The political, the social, the organizational, the home, the people that I live with, right? If that is running counter to my effort is not surpassing those challenges, then probably I'll regress to whatever I'm born with. If my efforts are surpassing, outsmarting, outfoxing, outdoing those things, then I'm also fundamentally, I'm growing to an extent, I'm not only challenging, but also that definition that yes, leaders are born or leaders are made. Then the leaders are made statement goes probably miles and miles ahead of the statement called leaders are born. So yes, for historical reason, probably we were made to believe that leaders are made. That has no scientific finding. There's no hard science which would tell you that leaders are made. The science always points to the fact that leaders are made.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for your answer. That means it is not important that what has offered to us, but what we make it.
Absolutely.
Thank you, sir.
You're welcome. Thank you. Thanks for asking the question. So friends, I believe much as I'm delighted to carry on with this conversation. I'm looking at the clock, which is struck 12:30. I believe all of you need to really log out of this conversation to get back to your work. So please take down my number and my email ID. Stay in touch. To a great extent, despite my other regular schedule, I would, as far as possible, I would like to have this conversation with all of you. So please drop a message or write to me to the best possible extent that my intelligence allows me. I would respond. I would have this conversation. And guess what? This conversation is also important for a teacher, right? I have to constantly make myself better than who I am. So thanks a lot for this opportunity. I thank Mr. Amita Bhattacharjee and Ms. Asmita Salunke for this opportunity to talk to you today. And have a lovely remainder of the day ahead for all of you. Thank you, friends. If there is nothing, then we can probably call it a day. Over to you, Mr. Bhattacharjee and Ms. Asmita Salunke.
Thank you so much, sir. On behalf of JMA, whole team of JMA, I would like to thank you for the wonderful session and giving insights on basic leadership characteristics, importance of emotional intelligence, and most importantly, the science behind leadership behavior. Thank you very much for kindly accepting our invitation and joining us today. We would love to hear again and again from you. We are having a very overwhelming response from all the participants. So thank you so much for joining in. A feedback link is shared with all of you in the chat box. Please share your valuable feedback with us. For more upcoming events, please follow JMA on social media. You can also reach us at centerhead.jsrjma@gmail.com. Thank you again. Have a great day. Take care.
Thank you, friends. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.